Hello, everyone. I'm here to talk to you guys about how can we make our writing stronger? Brains. We eat the brains. Wait, that's not right. We use our brains. Sorry, guy. All right, so today we're going to be talking about how to use the RACE strategy. RACE stands for restate the question, answer the question, cite your source, and explain your response. This is a strategy you should be using with all sorts of writing. It doesn't matter what subject or content area you're in, the RACE strategy is going to be used all the time. So, in order for us to feel really, really smart, sometimes we start with, I know this because. That's actually not the best way to start off your writing. I can assume. All right, you're getting there. All right. A little bit better is, this evidence shows us. And the reader can infer. So much better. The reader can infer makes you sound so much smarter and so much better of a writer than using, I know this because. All right, so for checkpoint number 1 in language arts, the first question that you're going to be asked is, Sal says, I realized that the story of Phoebe was like the plaster wall in our house in Bybanks, Kentucky. And this is a quote from chapter 1 at the very end of chapter 1. So the question says, you're going to analyze this passage. Hint, why is Sal comparing Phoebe's story to a plaster wall? What does the plaster wall symbolize? All right, so some of you might turn in a sample answer that says, because the more Sal started to know Phoebe, she started discovering herself. Well, that's a pretty decent start, but it doesn't really flow. So right now you're about right there. Not so high on the evolutionary chain. So if you look at our RACE strategy, what did we do? We did not restate that question. We kind of answered the question. We gave a pretty decent answer, but nothing too deep. We didn't cite any sources or give any quotes. And then we didn't explain what our response meant or what it shows us. So let's dig a little further and get into that RACE strategy just a little bit deeper to see exactly what we're looking for. All right, so let's look at this part of the question. Why is Sal comparing Phoebe's story to a plaster wall? Okay, so the first thing that you can do is restate the question. This is the easiest way for us to be on track and stay on target with answering our questions. So I'm using the words from the question. Sal is comparing Phoebe's story to a plaster wall because this in blue is all restating the question. This means the more Sal started to know Phoebe, she started discovering herself. That was the answer that we had on the last slide. So this goes with answering the question. Now, going a little bit further, we're going to give a piece of textual evidence, or we're going to cite a source in our answer too. So in chapter 1, Sal says, the reason that Phoebe's story reminds me of that plaster wall and the hidden fireplace is that beneath Phoebe's story was another one, mine. So that's citing the source. That's giving some piece of the story or some part of the book that goes along with our answer. So this says, hey, that plaster wall reminds me of another story, mine. So that goes with our answer of Sal started to know Phoebe, she starts discovering herself. Now, the last piece of the RACE strategy. So we have RACE, restate the question, answer the question, cite the source, is explain your response. What I know from this is just like Sal's dad would chip away at the plaster until there was no more to unveil. So you are explaining what this, cite the source, your quote, what this means compared to your answer. All right, so on our evolutionary scale here, we are no longer at this guy. We are, we're a little bit further, but why not? Okay, let's see why we're not all the way on the best scale that we could get on. But I did all the work. Yes, you did use the race strategy to answer the question. Old lady gives you claps. I'm just kidding. That's the Queen of England. You guys need to know that. So remember this guy? The reader can infer. We didn't use that sentence or that phrase at all. So we want to come back. We want to proofread our paper and make a few quick adjustments. Little tiny things can really have a big impact on your writing. So let's take a look. I'm just going to copy and paste the answer we just had into a new slide. So Sal is comparing Phoebe's story to a plaster wall because, that was restating, this means the more Sal started to know Phoebe, she started discovering herself. That was answering the question. In chapter 1, Sal says the reason that Phoebe's story reminds me of that plaster wall and the hidden fireplace is beneath Phoebe's story was another one, mine. That was the cite your source. Give me a quote from the story. What I know from this is Sal's dad would chip away at the plaster wall until there was no more to unveil. So here's a hint. If you are using I in your answer, we want to avoid that. When you're using I as if talking about yourself, it makes you sound not as smart as you could. So let's change this phrase around just a little bit. Instead of using the word I'm going to rephrase and say, the reader can infer that Sal's dad would chip away at the plaster wall until there was no more to unveil. So if you're saying the reader can infer, brains, so many brains, you sound so much smarter. Now the next step here would be giving even a little bit more detail and saying, hey, I know I have a comparison of two things. She's comparing, which is a simile because she's using like or as. This simile is comparing chipping away at a plaster wall and getting to see something new to getting to know Phoebe and learning something new about her. So we're making that comparison of chipping away at a plaster wall and getting to see that new fireplace behind it to getting to know Phoebe and getting to know something new about her. If that's a comparison, I am using that figurative language there. There we go. So now I'm all the way down here, highest evolutionary scale we can get. So now we have a really quick, easy change that made our paper sound really, really smart. So I want to use this strategy all the time in my writing, not just today, not just in language arts class. This strategy will make you sound smart all the time. So A+ for today. So in conclusion, eat brains, race some cars, and know who the Queen of England is. I'm just kidding. Use the race strategy to answer your questions. Use complete sentences and use the reader can infer instead of using something like, I know this because. All right, what do you do now? Head back into Google Classroom and work on the assignment called Checkpoint Analyzing Evidence. This has a few questions on it about Walk Two Moons in the chapters that we've read so far. So see me in our Google Meet and we'll talk about your questions that you may have and I'll help you along the way. If you need anything, let me know. I'll see you guys back here in a bit.